Oh, hey, Nerida. Really appreciate you making the time this morning to have this virtual fireside chat. So let's get into the questions. Now, hot off the press, this morning the federal government announced the Homebuilder scheme, $25,000 grant, really for middle income Australia. What's your thoughts? Do you think this hits the mark in terms of what the industry really needs right now?
Look, it's great, as you said. Anything that can get the construction industry moving is overwhelmingly a positive, particularly at the moment. I think the grant doesn't quite hit the mark on a number of levels. I guess the first one is that investors are excluded, and fundamentally that is a problem for the apartment sector. The majority of apartments in Australia are owned by investors. We know that market is, the developers in that market, many of them are a little bit worried about the outlook. So this really doesn't help them all that much. It does help first home buyers, it does help owner occupiers. And what we can see on realestate.com.au at the moment is that those groups are actually pretty positive anyway at the moment. So we're still seeing very high levels of inquiry, lots of activity, but when we look at investor activity, that's really the problem area. The price point's an issue as well. I mean, it's not such an issue for Melbourne, but for Sydney, it's a really big issue because basically the price point excludes most locations unless you head out to the suburbs and build a house and land project. And again, when we see inquiry across all new development types, house and land, everything's slowed obviously, but house and land is showing far more resilience than apartments. So, I think from the apartment development sector, I think it is disappointing. But obviously for trades and for employment and, trying to get activity in the economy, it is far better than just giving people a little bit of extra money to buy an established home, which can be quite inflationary in terms of pricing.
Terrific. Appreciate those insights. And talking about government initiatives, so I guess from my perspective as a tax advisor, one of the really good things that's happened is there's been a lot more cohesion between state and federal government through this crisis. And it's really driven some initiative, in particular by Victoria and New South Wales, those governments to really push on the agenda to the federal government on really important tax reform, in particular stamp duty, which, as we know, can be really inefficient because it's driven by the quantity of stock. What's your personal view on the need for this type of reform? Do you think a well-informed tax reform will significantly help more affordable housing and housing stock?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, I don't think any economist is going to come out and say that stamp duty is a great tax and leads to the best outcomes. Land tax system is far more positive. It has surprised me the level of change being mooted at the moment with regards to stamp duty. I think the most substantial change to stamp duty was a little bit of fiddling around back a couple of years ago that New South Wales did with the rate, which basically dropped it by about $100. So, there hasn't really been much discussion. So, it is surprising at how much people are pushing forward with regards to stamp duty. State governments are pushing forward. I think it will be interesting to see what eventually comes out because it isn't easy, obviously, to change taxation. And we have seen in Canberra, it's a very, very long process to get it from a stamp duty system to a land tax-based system. And then there's all those issues around unfairness. If you've already paid your land tax, do you have to pay if you already paid stamp duty, you have to pay land tax. So I know there are a lot of, there's plans being handed down to the Treasurer in New South Wales at the moment. I had a quick look this morning, and there's so many announcements at the moment that it's hard to kind of make sure that you're absolutely on top of exactly what's happening. But there doesn't seem to have been any further announcements at this stage. Surveying that we've done does highlight what you were saying about inefficiencies. We rely on stock turnover as a company, so we hate stamp duty as at a corporate level. But we can also see that buyers are also deterred by it. That 75% of people that we've recently surveyed did say that they would be more likely to buy a home if there was no stamp duty payable. So, that at a very, customer consumer level shows that, even they hate it. So, moving to a land tax system would be positive for them.
Excellent, because there's every chance, and this will take a while, but there's every chance if this reforms get done over time, I could be certainly losing out on a lot of work, but that's okay, because a lot of that work was just trying to avoid paying stamp duty twice, for example, or foreign capital coming in paying additional amount of extra tax. Final question, bit of a crystal ball question, in particular for the housing market in Victoria. What's your personal opinion on the short, medium and long-term outlook, the best you can given what's going on?
Yeah, look, I guess right now we are seeing a lot more strength in the established market than we expected. When we had a look at, we track, so many data points every week, and the week following the COVID-19 lockdowns, we saw this dramatic drop in search activity, which was quite alarming. We'd been on a pretty steady increase for quite some time. The start of the year was looking very, very strong, but we saw this dramatic decline. Since April, though, it's steadily climbed back up, and we are seeing, again, incredibly high levels of search from buyers. It's flowing through to inquiry. It does seem to be impacting the market quite differently depending on what part of the market you're in. So if we have a look at established housing in premium locations at the moment, that seems to be holding up really well from a buyer demand perspective. If you have a look at number of properties for sale, there's a big problem there. We're continuing to see a drop in the number of properties available compared to the same time last year. So, that's a problem. Investors aren't very active, as I mentioned before. Foreign investors are also not particularly active, and and we're not, and I make this statement on a market level because obviously there are some projects that they are quite focused on, but overall they are quite dramatically down, and dramatically down from China in particular, which was such a massive buyer group. So new development is very challenged at the moment, and again, as I mentioned before, house and land seems to be far more resilient at this stage than what we're seeing in the new apartment sector. Longer term, there's a lot of I guess it does depend on how soon we open up our borders, how soon we can get migration levels back up again. If we do see an 85% drop in migration, which the Treasurer did flag, that has enormous implications for the amount of new development. Foreign students, in Melbourne, they are a big, have created an enormous demand for apartments. So, again, they're not particularly active, and, how soon can we get them back into the market? So I think, at this stage, established housing, if you've got a house in South Yarra or you've got a house in Albert Park, you're probably, you're okay, and you are seeing decent demand. But I think more from, that construction sector, new apartments, supply that's going to come through, I think that's the area that's still very unknown.
Excellent. I think we're all adjusting and to this new kind of normal, and it's really appreciated that you've given that level of insight. And also, like you said, who knows when we can open up the borders, and but more importantly, thank you for your time and those questions. I know you're busy. There's a lot more stuff to probably read to get on top of, and I'm really looking forward to when we can actually meet in person and have you physically down and present it with real people. But thanks for making this time, and all the best, Nerida.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.